Good evening, everybody. We are here tonight on Wurundjeri land, and I would like to start our talk by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I would like to pay my respects, and on behalf of my team of co-presenters as well, pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We'll be talking about research tonight, and I do also want to acknowledge Indigenous people, First Nations people, as our first scientists, really establishing science and innovation for the past few millennia and ongoing. As this slide shows you, we'll be talking about a very exciting project, a project that you can actually experience for yourself just around the corner in the meat market as well as online for those of you checking in digitally. Biometric Dungeons and Dragons. Tonight we'll be taking you through a bit of a history of the project. We'll be talking to you about how exactly it works without giving too much away, of course, as we all do. And we'll be talking about some of the preliminary insights that we've gathered here during the week. We'll also invite some of our team members to talk about their experience using Biometric Dungeons and Dragons, as well as their experience playing actual Dungeons and Dragons games with some of these AI-generated player profiles. Let me first introduce my colleague, Dr. Melissa Rogerson, who's super keen to give a bit of background about this project.
But why don't you start, Niels, with the...
Well, yeah, look, all right. And perhaps a good sort of disclosure statement. I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons player. Can all the Dungeons and Dragons players, or those of you who have played it at least once, let's say, just quickly raise a hand? Oh my. All right. Clearly a minority here, but that's fantastic. Look, I was really invited into this project and into this collaboration by Melissa. Melissa has an enormous knowledge of games, an enormous knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons, I should say, as well. My knowledge is more, I guess, AI, ethics, the boring stuff. I'm kidding. It's not boring. And a project such as Biometric Mirror, which we launched out of the University of Melbourne a couple of years ago, I think proved that ethics and AI aren't boring. What Biometric Mirror did, and you can see the slide there on your left, is it allows you to upload a photo, or it takes a photo of you, and it then analyzes who you are. And you can see from the screen that it does quickly get quite sort of, thought-provoking and perhaps quite invasive. Assuming that we still live in a binary gender society, it will tell you whether you're male or female. Again, I think as a society, luckily, we have progressed past that point, but most AIs haven't and will probably never be able to. But it also tells you how kind you look, or how happy, how common, whatever that means, how responsible and how attractive, again, whatever that means. You look, as well as aggressiveness. I tend to have stubble. Today is, Wednesday, Thursday. So my Thursday stubble is starting to appear, and apparently by Thursday and Friday, I'm much more aggressive than I am on a Monday. I hope, Melissa, that's not the real story?
I'm terrified of you.
So what we thought is, look, Dungeons and Dragons is, and forgive me if I'm using the wrong terminology, but I think a complex game for new players. Creating a character takes time, takes effort. It's a quite elaborate process. We thought, why don't we seek opportunities for Biometric Mirror and that sort of thought-provoking, nasty AI to find its way into Biometric Mirror? Melissa?
Yeah, so when I saw Biometric Mirror, that was actually my first reaction was, hey, this kind of looks like it's almost a D&D character sheet. And full disclosure, my D&D history is AD&D, like first edition, and the red box and the blue box that came before that, so it's quite dated. But really those memories of rolling dice, determining characters, getting quite random results, and using that to define not just kind of what you were capable of, but also to some extent your personality. And so I was very fortunate. I think Niels and I are very happy to be working together anyway to sort of combine both of our interests into this project. And so the first question that we asked ourselves was, can we do it? Can we use biometric to generate a D&D character? And there's a very short answer there. Yes, we can. And for the four of us here tonight, here are some of the characters, let's say, that we have generated using biometric D&D. And you can see, I hope there's a bit of a range going on. What we're not showing you is like my very first character that I generated, where I had an intelligence of 6, which most of you will know is about your average bear, right? Not even a smart bear, just kind of a pretty dumb bear. So one of the things that we realised was trying to emulate that kind of 3 to 18 range wasn't something that we should be doing. Instead, we should be looking at what does a normal human look like, and let's try to replicate that normal human in the form of a D&D character. Niels, do jump in when you're ready to say something. But so far this week, I think I took this report last night, we've had more than 3,000 people try biometric D&D, or I should say we've had more than 3,000 biometric D&D sessions, because we know that lots of those are the same person trying over and over to change their character or try to work out what it is that makes their character the same. And there's a couple of things maybe that Niels will talk about that really stand out, I think, out of this sample of 3,200 people.
Yeah, look, I think the numbers sort of speak for themselves. Clearly we have many chaotic, evil people in our midst. I don't know if that's a representation of Melbourne. I would have thought that Sunday morning breakfast and avocado on toast wouldn't really represent chaotic evilness necessarily. But really interesting as well is those groups such as the lawful evil alignment. You can see that it's 1 or 2 people out of 3,000 that have that sort of alignment. And again, I keep asking Melissa all of these probably sort of novice questions. Is this a good representation of what a D&D game could potentially look like? Melissa keeps saying probably not. And I think that's for me from this sort of AI and AI ethics perspective really interesting. If this at the moment does not reflect a D&D game, it probably also does not reflect society, and it's probably also a sort of assumption we could apply to AI that is applied in society and that might have more significant consequences for us. Say that, for instance, assumptions such as these, or the assumption biometric mirror makes, imagine that these are used to influence hiring processes, and imagine that your lawful evilness, for instance, is used as a metric. Say you're actually not suitable for job X or job Y, and you can only pick course X and Y, for instance.
And we've talked about that a bit, this idea that we couldn't take all the photos, all the school photos of last year's school leavers and allocate them to courses based on their face, based on their photo. But that's effectively what we're doing here. We're giving people a job within D&D based purely on their photo. So we've got some quite interesting data that we have just started to generate today. Niels spoke earlier about how Biometric Mirror was assigning a binary gender to
exactly these same biases already sit in that data. And again, I'll talk a bit more about why that has happened in the next slide, but it's just a reflection of what we think, or what most of us would think, I guess, in society.
Go on.
Oh, well, there we are, how it works. Do you want to?
You can start.
Yeah, great.
This is your bit.
So the original biometric mirror data set lives in the cloud, as that's currently called, the cool way. It's a data set consisting of originally roughly 10,000 images. They have then been sent to humans in the US, I should say, to manually annotate each individual photo, so each individual photo containing a face. They were asked to describe, on a scale from 1 to 10, exactly those same parameters that you would have seen in the previous screen. How aggressive does this face look like? How attractive is it? How responsible? How emotionally unstable? How weird, etc., etc. All of that information was originally collected for research around memorability, so no harm intended there. But we embraced that data set and actually explored that route of what if we were not necessarily intending harm, I guess, but what if we were intending to develop a commercial product, say, to help us make decisions and assumptions about people. So what we did is we fed all of these very ugly Excel sheets into a machine learning model, which we've sort of represented there by way of the database icon and the cloud, which then gave us a solution that allowed us to upload a photo of a face, technically speaking also photos of cats, phones, whatever, and the AI would simply compare whatever was shown on that photo with the information in our data set. And as a result, we would get that screen right next to the icons, so the sort of rough assumption of what other people, I should say that, and I should really stress that this is merely a representation of what other people in society, in the US, would think about you if they see your face.
So we took that, and working with a student, Kevin Wang, we did a mapping. So we got some D&D players to look at those attributes that come from Biometric Mirror and match them to D&D stats, right? So which of the Biometric Mirror attributes do you think represent strength? Which of them do you think represent intelligence? Which represent the law chaos axis, for example, on alignment? And I can tell you that is, I think, responsibility. So high responsibility predisposes you to kind of lawful. High weirdness predisposes you to chaos. We think that might be why we've got quite a high number of chaotic people in our data set now. And so we're not doing any new sort of background data generation there. We're literally just mapping those attributes from Biometric Mirror and the scores that it gives someone against the D&D sort of 6 core stats, alignment, and then we're generating the character class from what we've got there. And that gives us our biometric D&D character sheet, I guess, or proto, mini character sheet. And Yian, who is a student with us, who's done a lot of the kind of coding work and redeveloping the algorithms there, and we're very fortunate that he's been on our team. Yeah.
And Melissa already flagged that we're not using the model, or we're not further enriching the model, enriching, air quotes. We're not adding more photos of faces to the data set, and I think I might preempt perhaps some of the questions that we might get later on, but often I get the question, how do you improve face recognition or face analysis? I tend not to, or prefer not to answer that question, but really fire it back. Do we really want to optimize it, and do we really want to improve it? Do we really want to have systems in society that can distinguish whether you're a lawful evil person? Okay, in the context of Dungeons and Dragons, that's fairly harmless. You might have a pretty annoying game to play with your friends and peers. But if we take that out of the context of D&D, a lawful evil alignment could have disastrous consequences. So probably as a society, we shouldn't improve all of these systems. We should probably just draw lines as to where we want this technology to take us. and where not?
This is kind of a bit of a detailed flowchart, but this is really looking at, once we've generated the stats, how do we assign a character class to someone? And what's interesting to me is we have very few rogues in our data set. We have very few fighters in our data set. We have very, very few rangers in our data set. And we don't think that this flowchart is the problem there. We think that that's about the ratings of people that are sitting in the back end. But we're really open to kind of re-explore this. So the idea is we'll take your highest stat. If you have a tie for your highest stat, then we will take them in that order of charisma, intelligence, wisdom, strength, dexterity, and then we will allocate you to a character class. So this is all kind of going on in the background while you see that little image of something scanning. And we're really open to criticism and to feedback on whether we've got this flowchart right, but certainly what we're seeing is it's not the last things that we evaluate that are the character classes that are largely absent in our data set. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of the how we do it. And I guess all summed up in that little word yes that we put up earlier, right? Yes, we've found that we can generate a character based on those stats. What we'd like to do now is introduce Nellie Seal and Ben Kiernan, who have been working with us for the past 6 weeks or so, I think, looking at how do we communicate this? How do we bring this back to you as players? And how can we actually create something that is playable based on this huge diversity of people? I'll pass this to...
So I guess I'll start. The first dot point being, how do players feel about being assigned a character that is based on them? 2 mics, a bit weird. For the most part, people think it's a bit of fun. They just want to jump in and play without having to go through the rigors of creating a character, rolling up stats and picking alignment and class. It's just kind of a bit of fun to be assigned something and play. That being said, we have only been running hour-and-a-half games. These aren't full characters for a full session. They don't really have much of a backstory to them. They are very much characters of necessity, and we created a scenario that would allow them to work very directed into this game. There's not a lot, I would say, going on behind the scenes for their character to motivate them. And if there was in the games that we have run so far, that had been the players elaborating themselves and adding things themselves into it.
Yeah, I think what we've found is that players, even though ostensibly you're playing yourself when you sit down with a character sheet that's come out of Biometric D&D, are still playing characters that are kind of larger than life. And I wonder if that's partly because of the magical nature of D&D. So it's fantasy. You're playing spellcasters, you're playing people who can do backflips. And that is, in many ways, not realistic, even if you are playing the statistics that Biometric D&D has assigned to you. The other thing with the character sheets is that we arbitrarily made a bunch of choices. So when you sit down to play a game with us, you get your stats as were generated by Biometric D&D, but we have arbitrarily given you an armor class and hit points, and for the spellcasters we've picked all of the spells and put in all of the modifiers for damage and things. So a lot of things that are actually based on the statistics we sat down and just decided, because it cuts out a lot of the time that you spend normally with new players creating a character and figuring all those tiny details out. But yeah, as Ben said, it's kind of the gimmick of it is what is really drawing players in, I think, and what is letting them really enjoy the short sessions is that it's fun for an hour, but I do wonder how people would feel about it if they were playing this character that they've been given, for a year, 3 years. I'm in a campaign that's been going on for 5. Like, That's a long time to play something that you don't feel super great about. And even more if you don't feel super great about it because it's supposedly a version of yourself.
And it takes away a lot of escapism that is often inherent in D&D. We make everybody who plays this a human. And as many of us know who play D&D, humans are actually vastly underrepresented in players. They often play one of the more interesting races. Elves, dwarves, tieflings, those kinds of things. They don't often play humans unless it's for mechanical reasons. But being assigned a human and a class that you don't necessarily usually play, we have had people who have played wizards who had never played wizards, or people who have played barbarians who never play barbarians, and that was interesting to them, to play something that was outside the realm of what they're used to. And we could have gone further and made full character sheets, as like picking spells based on biometrics and things, but that wasn't what the project was about.
Yeah.
Well, never say never.
One of the things that I've found really interesting when we look at people getting their characters, have any of you generated characters with biometric D&D? I see a couple of nods. How did you, can we possibly take the microphone down? Would you mind telling us, over here, I think, how you felt? Wave to Ben if you've generated a character. I think there are a couple in the middle here, yeah? How did you feel about the character that was generated for you?
It was pretty funny because I think it gave me chaotic evil, which is generally not how I think about myself. But it was interesting, the stats. Yeah, I guess if I was to make a character sheet based on myself, it wasn't what I would have assigned myself. But it was interesting. It would definitely be fun to play, I think. Very different to me. But yeah.
I notice with people who get assigned an evil character, they tend to either say, "Oh, why am I evil?" Or they go, "Evil." And, maybe they're the ones that really should be evil. So I think that's interesting. The other thing that we're seeing people going back and trying many times, "Oh, that's not quite what I want." So I don't know if anyone's done that and had a few different goes. Our colleague was suggesting the other day that what we really need, and we can't do it obviously in these COVID times, is glasses and some props that we could have at the table that you could try on, because we certainly suspect that there's something going on with glasses as well as with stubble, and maybe with smiles as well.
Yeah, and I think that also indicates one of the major shortcomings of our technology, and by extension perhaps the sort of broader facial recognition tech that we have. It's very often based on snapshots. And if you go to biometricdnd.com, it'll ask you for a photo. That's who you are at that time. And as Melissa said, you might wear glasses, or you might put glasses on or off, or put a hat on or whatever. So it's you at that specific instant in time. If I hear Nelly say that there's campaigns that last 5 years, over those 5 years, you will not always be the chaotic evil person. There might be days where you feel, really annoyed and probably don't even want to play a D&D game, I imagine, over 5 years' time. So that would probably influence who you are, what your abilities are in the game as well. Perhaps one more point, again, me being the D&D novice, from this ethics perspective, you get, even I get my D&D character. It gives me something to reflect upon as well, and I think we notice that with others who have never played D&D before, all of a sudden there's this scorecard character sheet that tells them their intelligence is a level 10, but then their charisma is a level 16. It's really interesting how everyone takes something away from this and starts asking questions. How does it know this? How does it calculate my charisma? How does it calculate my intelligence? And why am I only a 10? So I think it, as a sort of vehicle to open that discussion about technology ethics, it is still very effective. Even though D&D might be a hurdle for some, I guess, it still gives us all something to think and talk about.
I was going to say something very smart, but I've forgotten what it was, so we'll keep going. Yeah, so moving into the ethics space, we have had a few people sort of say to us, how can you even play with this stuff? This is so immoral, this is so unethical, you shouldn't be presenting it as something that's fun. And I think my response to this is we're presenting it as something that's broken and that is manipulable and very, very manipulable. One of the things that I noticed quite early on, corporate headshots, right? I've got a headshot that I use at the university, so does Niels, so does our head of school. Guess what? We're all lawful good bards when we run those photos through. And so there might also be something really interesting there about the way that we choose to present ourselves in particular situations. Although that doesn't quite explain, I think one of Ben's friends who posted a picture of himself aggressively picking his nose and got a wizard character with high intelligence.
Like maximum intelligence, yeah. Clearly an enlightened mind.
And again, to the point, why is it saying that I am not intelligent or very aggressive? It's because how some societies would think about you. Again, when I scroll through the original data set of the few thousand photos, don't worry, I don't do that very often. It's really in times of total despair when I do that. And you see the metrics, you see the numbers associated with faces, faces that reflect gender, faces that have a particular skin tone. It's really sad that it is indeed how societies think about ourselves, but it's even more worrying and even sadder when you see that products such as these are actually currently commercially available. We haven't touched upon it, but there are automated recruitment services around, very popular also in Australia, where photos, where resumes, where other social media data of yourselves might be automatically sort of scraped and scanned, and all sorts of assumptions would be made about who you are. Even your interview, if you happen to do an interview in front of a webcam, as I guess many of us would do these days, that video data might be analyzed in real time. Okay, you could argue it's not a snapshot, but it's still an interview, probably when many of us are in our most vulnerable sort of state, nervous. We really want that job. We get a bit caught on the spot, asking to respond to really challenging questions. And that AI might pick you out as being the nervous person or not intelligent. I would only hope that AIs never say that about people, but even not responsible, how harmful is that and how inappropriate is that to be basing that off interview data, for instance, or even your social media data?
Which brings us back to D&D, I guess. No. I think we really think that these ethical issues are hugely important, and we know that over nearly 50 years now it is since D&D was released. Role-playing games have been used to explore ethical issues, and the framework of D&D has changed, right? Like race is no longer kind of as integral. Alignment isn't as integral to D&D anymore as it used to be. And a lot of those assumptions, when I played D&D, you had to be a halfling to be a thief because small people are really sneaky. I don't know. These sorts of assumptions were absolutely built into the game, right? Primarily elves were smart enough to be magic users, right? These kinds of assumptions, and so those ethical decisions are already being made. And we've tried to maybe cover over some of them, I think, in terms of, we've avoided the race question, we've avoided the gender question, we've slightly avoided the age question, although it's there, you just don't know it. But so we've tried to not confront people with what we're presenting. I think one of the interesting lessons for us, though, was how confronting intelligence and evilness have turned out to be. They're the two things that I think people have
picked up on and have talked about. Do you guys have thoughts about that from your conversations with people that have come through the booth too? With the mic.
I mean, I think intelligence is always the one that people look at and feel not so great about, particularly if it's low. I know I had I won't say argument. I had a conversation with someone earlier in the week who looked at, I think, her strength and dexterity scores and was very upset because she's an elite athlete, and it just couldn't pick it up. And she was like, "Well, why don't you do a full body scan then?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, we'll just fix that right now. Go back to the lab." But I think intelligence is often the one that's the most confronting. I guess also because it's the one that is the most easy to comprehend. Sometimes wisdom is a little tricky to kind of explain in the context of the game. Dexterity is not necessarily something you think about. You don't think about how your dexterity score applies to your ability to get on a tram or a train or something like that. But intelligence is something that everyone can relate to really easily, and so I think that's probably why that one's the most confronting.
I think also part of that is if it's just looking at your face, you can kind of ignore it guessing your strength score because it's only seeing your face. You can kind of ignore its dexterity, but when it's looking at your face, we associate the eyes and the face so much with intelligence that if a computer says it's looking at your face and then assigning an intelligence score, well then that has to be more accurate.
Yeah. Also, the event is called Knowledge Week. Just saying, Intelligence Knowledge Week. Yeah, look, I think we've probably covered most of what we wanted to say, but I'm sure you all have many sort of questions, concerns. For those of you who haven't tried biometric D&D, do it. It's a fun experience. You participate in research. It's safe as well. We're not interested in your photos. Don't worry. I was going to say, don't trust me. No, I said, trust me, don't worry. But also you can walk over to our booth. Matt is there staffing the booth, and he'll talk you through how it all works as well. But yeah, feel free to ask us any questions and we'll do our best answering them.
Just a quick one on when you sent the photos back over to the States, were there like single people evaluating the photos or was it a group of people and you grabbed the average? Because I want to try to determine how accurate that assessment was and like how big was the panel of people looking at those photos?
Great question. It was a few thousand people. So Amazon, the well-known Amazon, runs a service which is called Mechanical Turk. It allows researchers such as ourselves, I think also members of the public, to quickly get some sort of crowdsourced data. So it's ideal for the things Biometric Mirror is based on. So it's a few thousand people annotating all of these photos. So that means one photo has been reviewed by multiple people. And for Biometric Mirror, we use the averaged result. Yeah.
And I will just stress, we're not sending photos back to the States, right? We are comparing them with the results that are sitting in a database. Yeah. So the original set of photos were analysed, that became a database, and now it's kind of, I'm trivialising it. Niels is going to kick me under the table, because he's chaotic evil. But it's going to say something like, do they have big glasses, increase their intelligence a little bit, or do they have stubble, increase their aggressiveness, because it has recognised that in the patterns from people analysing the original photos. So your photos, when you use biometric D&D, your photos don't go any further, just to clarify.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that glasses tended to skew data a little bit, and I don't want to sound like I'm just very personal about that, but I am curious as to how it was skewed, if you did pick up, if you do know, I guess.
I kind of know. If I remember well, glasses typically make us look more intelligent, hence
And more attractive.
I didn't say that. And typically less aggressive, but I feel, my observation is that the beard typically overrules that. So the beard is more sort of, significant, I think, to distinguish an aggressiveness score. And I guess this already points to a really, a really interesting thing. We don't even know how our AI thinks and how it operates in a way. We've just fed all the data into this thing that does its own thing at the moment, but we have little to no control over it. I'm in a very distant past, I did a computer science degree, but I wouldn't call myself a computer scientist, but I was actually able to train this AI. So for me, that means it has to be really accessible and really easy. It's really a very graphical user interface where you drag your photos, where you drag your data sheet. It does a bit of magic, and it spits out this model that's very accessible. But nowhere along the way did I ever get a notification like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, or hey, you're working with human faces, you shouldn't be doing this. Nowhere along the way was that ever the case. Obviously, we're researchers. We abide by very sort of strict and rightly so, ethical rules. But if I tomorrow was a business hoping to make a profit, I could do exactly the same, sell this. To be honest, very soon after we launched Biometric Mirror a couple of years ago, we did actually get expression of interest from industry to buy our technology, which we did not further elaborate on with them.
There was a question here.
Hi. Did you have? Do you think that your perceptions of aggression and intelligence and stuff have been altered by the data that you've seen from the biometric mirror? I mean, has it shaped the way you now would see a face and go, "Oh, that guy's got a beard. He must be dangerous."
I do see people with beards and think you must be a chaotic, evil barbarian, and that's new this week, I can tell you. I think that we're not close. For me, I'm not close enough to the data to have that feeling. So I can see that we've got all of these chaotic, evil barbarians, but actually I haven't gone back and gone, oh, what faces were associated with that? I'm more interested, I'll say, in the patterns that are coming out. So this idea that perhaps women are more likely to be warlocks, was it, sorcerers, something, that for me, or people that are seen to be women, right? That for me is more interesting than actually going back and poring over the faces to try to consider how I might see them. What I think it has done is it's made me a lot more conscious about headshots, though.
Yeah, I don't think it has changed much of my thinking. If anything, probably a better appreciation of how we all think about these emotional states and psychometrics very differently. If you're very weird or perceived to be very weird by biometric mirror, that can be a really nice thing too. It can be great. It can be fantastic. But for some people, that can indeed also be upsetting. So there's just this massive diversity that we know computers challenge to really sort of assess and evaluate.
An interesting question that I was asked the other day was whether we'd thought about training a database on D&D stats. So whether we would have quite different results if we took photos of people and we said, what character class do you think this person is? How strong do you think they are? How dexterous, etc. Instead of kind of using second-hand algorithms or combinations of other data to try to generate that information. I never say never, but I doubt that we're going to go down that path, because I think it's more interesting to look at how do we understand these different traits and how would we apply them in understanding perhaps occupations and what people might potentially do. I think there was another question about that too.
On that note, can we perhaps do a very quick test, Melissa? Can you make a very quick assessment of Nellie's and Ben's usual, say, dexterity level in D&D?
Is this based on what I know or based on their faces?
Oh, you know, okay.
See, I've never seen either of them fall down a flight of stairs, so that's a plus. Nellie, I know, is a very talented artist, so, you know, I think Nellie's probably sitting, and of course, you know, I'm an academic, I never give anyone full marks. So, you know, I reckon I'd give Nellie 17. Don't tell my students I said that. So I reckon I'd give Nellie a 17 for Dex. I've never seen Ben fall down a set of stairs. I reckon, you know, Ben's as competent as anyone, but he hasn't I haven't seen anything that makes me go, he's particularly dexterous. So I reckon I'll give you 12, Ben. There you go.
So does that reflect how you see yourself in D&D?
Sorry. I mean, the trick there is that I also train in circus skills. And really, when I think about Dex, those are the metrics on what I think I hadn't considered, that art and fine motor skills would be fed into Dex. So it's interesting that you put that score so high, because in some ways I would agree with it, but I also hadn't considered that avenue, so it's interesting.
I, on the other hand, would know that 10s for every score is a medieval peasant. So am I more dexterous than someone who works with their hands for a living? And I would say probably not. Unless typing skills is a measure of dexterity, in which case, maybe?
So does that answer your question, or the question you have, whether we should train AIs to distinguish D&D attributes?
I think we're just as terrible at doing that as we are at everything else.
Agreed.
Mm.
I'd be curious to run the artwork in the Dungeons and Dragons art, like the books, like, oh, this is what a wizard looks like, and run it through biometric D&D and see what if it comes up as a wizard, if it would distinguish that face as a face, of course.
So Matt, who is on our booth, did that with 2 of the character archetypes last week. Didn't get it right. And I ran Jeff Goldblum this morning. Has everyone seen this announcement that Jeff Goldblum's going to be in this new D&D podcast? No? Oh, well, he is. But he's going to be a sorcerer, and Biometric D&D says he's a monk, so I'm sorry. Failed. Whether it was them or us that failed is unclear.
Are there any further... Oh, many questions. Wow.
Just quickly, it sounded like it was a relatively small data set you were working with when we're talking about the population of the world and some of the larger nations that are putting a lot of money and time into this sort of things. Have you sort of compared your results from the recognition software to some of the larger commercial software out there, and do you find that it's correlating fairly well? As in, are you finding like that's a happy face correlates well to some of the other commercial software saying that's a happy face, or is there a fair bit of disparity there?
We haven't compared it with any commercial data sets because we think there's no point, because indeed, I mean, my assumption is that our data set is complete rubbish. So there's no point in comparing it, really. But it is indeed a tiny data set, 2,000 images. You clearly have some knowledge of AI, I guess, and big data. In the AI world, 2,000 is a sort of, not even a starter pack. 10,000, originally 2,000 in the data set. It's not even a starter pack. It's meaningless. But again, the really interesting thing about Biometric Mirror there is that if we were to sell this tomorrow as a commercial product, we wouldn't have to disclose to you how many photos were in that data set. We would just sell this, put a really nice license fee on it, a good marketing campaign, and say this can help you in your business. It would improve your hiring process, for instance, and you would have no way to know how it functions, how accurate it is.
I think too, one of the big things is just do it again if you don't like it. Yeah. And that's something you can do when it's playful, but not, when it's serious.
When it's a job interview. Yeah.
Do you see biometric D&D or other similar kind of technologies as being something that could potentially improve specifically like Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games for people?
I hope not. I think what we've developed, So I'm pretty proud of what we've developed. I think it's really fun. I think people are really enjoying sort of exploring what it says about them, and then trying again and trying again and trying again. I think that's really fun. And we've clearly got a little bit more work that we can do in this space. So we're working at the moment on backstory generation, right? And how can we generate backstories for these characters that we're creating? So you haven't seen the end of us yet. But golly, I hope that this is not the way that D&D goes or that role-playing games go, because I guess there's two sides there. For me personally, that's not where the fun is. I don't want to sit down at a table and play myself. I'm pretty happy with my life, but it doesn't mean it's not fun to be someone else sometimes. And I think that it removes that wonderful imagination and storytelling element that we see in D&D. And the other thing, and I'm preempting Niels, but I'm sure he's going to say it, is it's crap, right? It's broken, it's rubbish, it's nonsense. If it tells you you're evil, don't feel that you have to go out and start committing crimes, right? Because it's wrong. And I'm not sure which is worse, to be honest, to be given a character that's wrong, but kind of maybe a bit fun, or to be given a character that's right.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think it would distract from the social experience as well. My understanding is that D&D is very much a social thing, as any tabletop role-playing game, as any other board game is, I think. So I would agree with Melissa. Let's hope that this doesn't find its way into D&D and other games. Yeah. I think we have probably time for one more question.
Hey, okay, cool. Always not sure how loud these are going to be. Given that your facial expression and what you're doing have an impact on the assessment of the AI, so smiling, frowning, nose picking, that kind of thing, do you give instructions to people who actually get their photo taken for this? And if not, could it be the reason that you get so many chaotic evils is because people assume, like I would, for example, that you might need to give a more driver's license kind of photo where you don't have an expression which makes you look more stern and therefore maybe more evil?
Good point. Yeah, who knows? Yeah. Look, we both work in a human-computer interaction group, so I think you're very spot on, and maybe that's something we need to explore in future versions as well, to give sort of prompts, and that could be physical sort of things we give to people, but maybe there are also on-screen prompts. At the same time, I'm always really curious to see people in their natural state. Natural might indeed be the driver's license look. But even then, it is really interesting. What we do see, though, is that many people retry it. So probably after one go, when they have turned into this the barbarians, after that, they probably realize that they can tweak and manipulate the system by smiling, by looking really grumpy, picking their nose, etc.
Hi guys, sorry, I've just got one final question. It's come through from one of the viewers that's watching on the Digital Hub, and they just asked, why do you specify that the participants should be 18 plus? Is there a particular reason?
That's about our university's ethics protocols. So we have ethics sign-off that says that we can collect data about people who are 18 or over. If we want to work with children, we have a lot more rules and regulations that we need to work through. And so when we thought about Knowledge Week, and we realised that, of course, there are going to be lots of children, particularly over the weekend when there's Family Day, then we actually built the second button. Niels was coding that on Sunday, I think, that second button that says I'm under 18. And if people select that, then we don't save their photo and we still generate their data, but it just gives us a way to allow those people to interact with the system without us kind of potentially capturing data about minors that we're not allowed by university kind of guidelines to protect research participants to collect. Yeah.
it's also a clever way for over 18s to not store your photo. So you just indicate that you're under 18 and we won't store your photo. I think we probably have to wrap up there, but I do urge you all to sit back, get a drink, stay here. We've got a D&D game session with some professional, players, experienced players, not me, don't worry. I'll be disappearing from the stage. We've hired these people. Well, Melissa, maybe you can introduce them as well.
So I think they will be properly introduced at 6:30 when they come down. But Ben McKenzie, who's a writer, comedian, and game designer, has brought together a group of 4 intrepid adventurers who are going to be given their biometric D&D characters that we have generated for them. They each gave us a number of photos and we generated some characters and picked some that look interesting. And there's going to be a sort of, live improv live stream of a D&D game played with these biometric D&D characters. And that, of course, will be available on the digital hub as well, and it should be available kind of at least till the end of May as well for people to watch. So, but yeah, we encourage you to stick around, have a drink, and come back and join them for their interesting adventure.
Yeah, thank you so much.